This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Katherine, Druckman, and I are talking with Lisa LeVasseur, who runs the Me2B Alliance, which is this amazing new nonprofit that's working at the edge of standards and treating people better and respectfully and trying to get sites and services and the world to treat every one of us, the me's of the world, more respectfully. And that only begins to touch on all the things we talk about in this show. A lot of great questions, a lot of great discussion, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 658, recorded Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. The Me2B's knees. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. The U.S. Postal Service processes more than 98,000 address changes daily. Is your customer contact data up to date? Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. And by Command Line Heroes, an original podcast from Red Hat that tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. Season 8 is out now. Search for Command Line Heroes on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hello again, and good morning, good evening, and whatever it is, wherever you are in the world. I am Doc Searls, and this is Floss Weekly, and I am joined this week by Katherine Druckman, who is in Houston, I believe, still.
That is true.
Not you can tell from looking at an interior, but yeah. You're not in a flyover state, though. I'm in Indiana. I'm in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, no, we're the
which is a
coast,
flyover state. I have pictures. But you've got an actual hub there in Houston for United. I've been there many times without ever visiting the city. I think I've been in the city like twice. So we have an interesting guest this morning, Lisa LeVasseur, and who I speak to on various conference calls at least once a week, I think, but I think it is new to you. But the issue is standards. Are you up on that at all, Katherine? We've got our own show.
I'm interested. I feel like I'm never up on anything as much as I should be, but it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take too much time before we get into the show, but first I have to let. Into it. Yeah, I am anxious to get into it. First, I have to let everybody know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Having accurate customer address data is crucial for the success of your business. Did you know that nearly 36 million address changes were processed by the USPS in 2020? That's a huge chunk of customers you could be missing out on. 30% of customer data goes bad each year, but Melissa can help make sure your data is current and accurate. Melissa is both experienced and independent and has over 35 years of data quality expertise, which explains why over 10,000 businesses know them as the address experts. Melissa also has a renewal rate of over 92% because 25% is the typical ROI for Melissa customers. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for 240 plus countries and territories at the point of entry. If you're tired of duplicate customer information in your database, Melissa's data matching will help eliminate clutter and duplicates, increasing the accuracy of the database while reducing postage and mailing costs. Identity verification, reduce risks, ensure compliance, and keep customers happy. Geocoding enrichments convert addresses into lat-long coordinates. Email verification, remove up to 95% of bad email addresses from your database. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise web service secure FTP processing and software as a service, that's SaaS, delivery options. Melissa also has their new Lookups app on iOS and Google to search addresses, names, and more at your fingertips. Melissa continuously undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. They are SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant. Melissa's Global Support Center also offers 24/7 world-renowned support if you sign up for a service-level agreement. Inquire today. Melissa is still supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online at melissa.com. Melissa has been named to Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Data Quality Solutions for a second year in a row. Make sure your customer contact data is up to date. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing with the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. Okay, I want to welcome to the show Lisa LeVasseur. Lisa is actually a good friend and somebody I talk to every week, one way or another, on calls for standards or on her own nonprofit, which is now relatively new. It's been new for the last couple of years. The Me2B Alliance, which I think is just a really important nonprofit in the world. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thanks, Doc. Thanks for having me.
there she is. So there's a lot we can talk about with this. So let's start with just the Me2B Alliance and your background and how you came to that, and then we can go to some of the other topics.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in software since I graduated in 1988. So I have kind of a long career in software development in some form or fashion. I got involved in industry standards in my career at Motorola, probably around the 1990s was when that happened, mid to late 90s. And I strangely fell in love with standards, which was a weird thing to fall in love with. And, fast forward many years, I have been working with Arlene Harris, the founder of Great Call and Jitterbug Mobile, on privacy-centric family solutions for some years. And back in about 2009 or 10, I had this idea of, gosh, we really need a different kind of standards organization, something that is more humane, something that addresses non-technical issues as well as technical issues. And that idea just started germinating, back in that time frame. And it was in 2018 at IIW, October, where it came to its sort of full fruition. I had been, just refining the idea and finally presented it at IIW and got a lot of support from you and others. And that was it. We were off to the races. And I basically formally kicked it off in 2019. And we've been hard at work. We're basically developing a safety standard for the internet, which is quite long overdue. Took us a little bit of a time to kind of find our footing and figure out how to build such a standard. But we're really on the threshold of launching our first specification for safe websites. So yeah, it's been a pretty amazing ride. We also do independent product testing. That's also something that we do to help validate our standard.
What is a safe website?
Yeah, what is safe technology? That's the question. And for us, we had to spend a considerable amount of time kind of figuring out exactly what that meant. What is our ethical foundation? Because obviously there's no universal ethic, and what hubris to think, oh, we'll figure one out. But we did need a foundation. We needed an ethical foundation. And where we landed was with this fundamental premise that we have relationships with technology, and we call these relationships Me2B relationships. And so if we regard these things as relationships, well, we know how we like to be treated in relationships, in our human relationships. So we basically took a look at the principles of healthy human relationships and adapted those for our sort of underlying ethical foundation for the attributes of healthy relationships with technology. And that's our rules of engagement on our website. And it has things like respecting each other's boundaries. We talk a lot about privacy and, data privacy and all of that. And that's really about healthy having healthy boundaries and respecting each other's boundaries. So that's really been our foundation, is really looking at human relationships, and that's kind of our ethical North Star for what constitutes safe. So, not taking things, respecting boundaries, not doing harm, just really grounding back into those sort of human social norms.
So in your organization, it's
Go ahead,
me,
Katherine,
meaning
sorry.
the users, right? Oh, sorry. Me means user and B means business, right? So do you cover the interaction, the B2B interaction, or even, I don't know, me to me? I'm not even sure what, I can think of some instances of that, but.
Yeah, not yet, but it really is designed to be extensible. And we do touch a bit of the B2B relationships in the context of acknowledging sort of, data controller, data processor, co-data controller relationships, and ensuring that things like an individual's privacy permissions and preferences get reflected all through the supply chain, through all of the data processors, all of the co-controllers, all throughout. But we're really kind of still oriented mostly on the experience from the individual's perspective.
Right. I just wonder, I can think of a lot of businesses whose business is user-to-user interaction, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the big, a lot of big entities, I suppose, platforms. And I just wondered if that was something you had ever gotten into. So establishing guidelines for how companies define user interaction with each other.
Yeah, we're kind of baby steps, right? We're starting with this very foundational set of tests that are really kind of, I call it more like plumbing. We're really kind of down in the invisible stuff, looking a lot at ad tech, really, because that's invisible for most people, and it's so pervasive and it's so enormous. It's massive. So we're really working at kind of this ground zero, and we see the spec evolving over time to kind of go up the stack in a way into the more higher level parts of the user experience.
That's interesting. So I'm really curious about your methodology, actually. How do you collect the data that then allows you to put together the standards that you're defining? Yeah.
So one of the things we knew we had to do is we knew that our testing had to be able to be run independently. That was really important for believability of the results. We also had reason to be sort of dubious of vendor-reported responses to questions, even though we have a questionnaire as a part of our data collection. But the brunt of our testing is really independent testing, and there's two primary kinds of testing that we're doing. One is looking at the user interface, and we're examining for certain things in the user interface, is there appropriate data processing notice that is useful at the time of making a transaction or a commitment. We call these points of transaction within the Me2B relationship commitments. So there's all these different levels of commitments, from a cookie commitment, right? That's like kind of the first thing we see, to maybe being asked for location. That's another thing we see, to signing up for a newsletter or marketing communications. That's another kind of commitment, all the way up to the pinnacle, which is creating a Me2B marriage, we call it. That's actually, creating an account. So we're looking for the user experience, like, is there coercion? Are there harmful patterns, dark patterns in the user interface with respect to any of these commitments along the way? In addition to that, we're basically running a data supply, a data flow test. We're looking at network traffic in and out of the app. Again, this is sort of black box. We don't know what happens when it goes back to the back office, and that's when we ask the vendor to tell us more about what their B2B data flows are. But we can see the data coming in and out of the app. And so we are looking at that directly and really scrutinizing, who are you sharing data with? We have a bunch of different methods to be able to look at, okay, what SDKs are included? What's the network traffic that we're seeing? We have kind of, multi-prong effort to really look at this and scrutinize what data is being entered at the user interface and what data is being shared over the network.
So you mentioned location data, and I think that's a really interesting place to go, not the least of which because you have an interesting blog post on your organization's site. But I wondered if that's an interesting area, I think, because it's one of those things that users really push back against, because nobody wants to feel like they have a beacon on their head, and are tracked like livestock. But at the same time, the data is very useful both for vendors and users at times. So it's this weird area where I think there's a lot of push and pull. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that in detail, about your findings in particular.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We have so much stuff in development that we're trying to get out, and So this research was some validation research. It came out of us actually applying the spec to a website and for a large U.S. company, and they were automatically converting the IP address into geographical location. And we gave them a failing mark on that. And they basically pushed back and said, we think we're being helpful. We think that people like this. And we said, we disagree, but we're going to test it, because we wanted to make sure that our sensibilities maybe weren't too idealistic. And so we did conduct a bunch of research, both qualitative and quantitative research, to validate this, because there is, as you mentioned, there is some, there's value. There is value, and we saw that in our research results too. But ultimately, the results confirmed that our score was right. People were not comfortable. They found it, relatively creepy. That was a word that people selected a lot. When location is detected automatically, and so we think that there are respectful ways to request information and to use information. And I think we still have a ways to go to make it as easy and frictionless, although I'm not a fan of that word. I think friction is important in life. But I do think that we're just still learning about what's that sweet spot, like where people can have some agency and some control over sharing, but also not be completely hampered with, like, cookie notices are a great example of something that just doesn't work well.
So how does the user take control? I'm asking for me and everyone listening.
Yeah, it's hard, and you don't really have the option a lot of times right now. And I think actually this is maybe a good segue to mention our work that Doc actually was instrumental in founding in the IEEE, which is a working group called P7012, which is machine readable privacy terms, which is trying to create a legally binding machine readable method for people to assert their privacy preferences and terms, like legally binding permissions and terms. Another thing that came out recently is the global privacy control signal, which is a browser level signal, which enables the do not sell bit in the sort of browser level. And browsers like the Brave browser and Firefox have this, I believe, automatically enabled when you use those browsers. But that does signal do not sell to any publisher that receives it in the browser header. So these signals are coming. I think we're still, it's very early, but these, thanks for putting the standard up. Yeah, these these methods will come, and people will have tools and agents working on their behalf, trusted agents that work for you, like that have duties of loyalty to the individual, not to the business.
There's so much to talk about here. I think a possible way of framing this is that in the physical world, we have the dance between individuals and each other, and individuals and companies, people walking into and out of stores. What happens when you walk in a building? Do they have security or not? Do you have a card that gets you through? All this stuff. Most of that is at the tacit level. It's not explicit. It's not thought out. It's just there, and we understand it really well, and it's very embedded in culture. But the technical world is not tacit. It's all explicit. It's all code. It's all written down. It's all carried out by machines, our machines, their machines. And there really is no, what we're talking about here, what we're working on, and you're doing such pioneering work on this, is really how is it that the me takes a lead in the dance with the B's, and not just the B's, it's the G's, it's the governments, it's the O's, the organization, but it's I guess where I'm going with this is how do you frame up in your own head how early this is, and how because the later it gets, the earlier it seems to me. I don't know if it feels that way to you as well, but it's, you're pushing a rock up a hill, but it's going to drop on the other side. It's just, how long is this hill?
Yeah.
And how do you look at it?
I think it's going to feel really long until it's fast. Like it's going to feel really slow, and then it's going to happen suddenly, kind of thing. And we're in that really slow part right now, I think, defining this. And it is hard. And I think about, like, the forefathers, and they were mostly fathers of the internet, were world building. They were world building, but they didn't recognize they were world building. And so everything is very explicit. And we didn't bring in our social norms at all. And that's where we are right now. I feel like really recognizing, about how does identification happen in the real world, in our day-to-day lives. It's subtle, it's nuanced, and we have an awful lot of control in our day-to-day lives. That is certainly not the case online. It's subtle, it's pervasive, it's invisible, it's very explicit, and it's happening at a grotesque scale online. Just like one thing, identification. And I'm not talking about like credentials, right? Like that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the visible part that people see. Oh, I've created some credentials here. That's nothing. That's nothing. You're being identified in, an enormous scale and magnitude all the time, every time you use any bit of technology in your lives. That's not how life is, like that is, if the real world worked like that, we'd be afraid to leave our houses, I think,
Yeah, and that's part of what makes it so pioneering. And, it's funny. When we started the Internet Identity Workshop, that was in 2005, and that actually is a successor conference after a number of other identity conferences. And if you told me in 1999 or 2000 that we'd still be talking about how do we make identity work online in 2021, I'd think this is hopeless. but we're going to have to work it out. I mean, that's sort of the interesting thing. And the missing piece is, what does the individual bring to the table? And I'd like you to talk a bit about, because you just took over as chairman of P7012 with the IEEE. And I was there at the start of that. And it was really when the IEEE, this 150-year-old organization or something like that, that's almost entirely worked for companies. It came to us, meaning a loose collection of people, saying, we need something happening from the individual side here, and you've got a missing piece in machine-readable personal privacy terms. My own nonprofit, Customer Commons, had been working on a term we could express in the same way as right now we're always agreeing to terms that sites express, but what about ones that they could agree to what we express, whatever that might be? How do we frame that up? And they kind of handed it over to us, and we came up with this thing, and you've brought a great deal of organization to it, which we didn't really have the first couple of years, because you're an engineer. I actually want our viewers and listeners here to know that you come from engineering and not just from wanting to do good here. But I think one of the things you've done is, and this is just in the last few weeks, is notice, maybe we could use the GDPR. Maybe we could use the language that's already in use there. And to frame this up in a way that is not harmful. I mean, because you're always thinking about how do we not do harms, right? And language can bring harm, right? Do we, in practice, the GDPR, while it says a data controller or a data processor can be a human being, that's not how it's been implemented for the most part. But we heard from one of the creators of the GDPR that, well, it's actually meant for people too, which kind of gave it a clean bill of health, I think. The back channel is saying women engineers rule, by the way.
Indeed, we do.
That was actually just me.
And we have two of them on this call.
Yes, we do, don't we, Katherine?
Yeah. The best.
I am gladly outnumbered here.
Well, I have to say that I'm a hybrid, because my undergrad was a dual major in computer science and philosophy because I could not decide. And it took 30 years for my degree to actually make sense in the world. So it was a long time coming. Yeah. The 7012 spec it's really necessary. I think I want to mention that we're working on this little pilot project to try to instantiate, just as a demo, the ability for people to have a little like my online relationship manager web service from which they can send a legally binding agreement. In some ways, I think of it as like a reverse EULA. It's a EULA that's coming from the individual. So it allows a person to send, to select a sanctioned and approved legally binding agreement to the Me2B Alliance, because that's how we're doing it. And then they'll also be able to modify and control the information that gets shared with the Me2B Alliance as a part of their membership under the terms of this legally binding agreement. So we're building out this little prototype of this, and we think the most interesting piece really will be about how people respond to it. Will they like it? Will they just think it's more work that they don't want to do? How, it's really going to come to the usability of it. Kind of all roads lead back to usability of stuff online. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see from that little pilot project, what do people like the most about this small sample experience? And, on the business side of us kind of supporting this ability to have a machine readable agreement being sent into us, also kind of sharing our perspective as a small startup, what was tricky, what was cumbersome, what was good, what was not so good and needs improvement. So I'm really excited about this this project. Well, we should have some results by February of next year, and it'll be interesting. That'll be really telling, and and there'll be a lot more validation research too around this to find out what are people's tolerances around this. I think I just saw something maybe in Wired about like people don't want to control, like it's not, control of their data is not the thing. I forget. I don't know. Maybe one of you saw it, but certainly control of data smacks of a lot of work, right? And if you don't have tools that make it virtually effortless, forget it. We don't need any more work. It's already too much work, like a lot of this account management stuff that we do, it's already too much. So, yeah. That's it.
Yeah. So for those of you not watching, what we're showing online is now it's time to give users control of their data. I think that there's. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I've had a problem with focusing on data when, in fact, what we need. I mean, you don't walk around the physical world saying, "What's my data? What's my data doing here and there?" I mean, it's
no, but you do say, "Where's my money? What's my money doing now?" And this is the heart of the problem.
What do you care about?
Is that data is money now? Data is money, sadly, and that's why we have to care about it. But I agree, it's too narrow a lens, really. And that's why we look at respect and safety. Like we're really looking at the behavior of technology and is it treating you with respect? And is it safe to use? Yeah.
That's a good question. It's like, I mean, what can we do when we actually have good reason to trust nothing? That's which is I think one of the states we're in online, and that's kind of one of your challenges there. I've questions are actually piling up on the back channel a little bit, but I have to let the audience know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is also brought to you by Command Line Heroes, an original podcast from Red Hat. Command Line Heroes tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. It offers a unique blend of historical context and current trends shaping the tech landscape. This season tackles one question from every angle. What is a robot? A servant, a factory worker, a prosthetic, a vehicle? Why do we build robots that look like us? And we often ask whether we can trust robots. Can robots trust us? Science fiction tells us many stories about robots. In the future, they'll serve our every need, or maybe they'll develop a mind of their own and turn against us. Maybe they'll be the savior of humanity or our downfall. Season 8 of Command Line Heroes covers the robots that are in our midst and the determined dreamers who bring them to life. 8 episodes compare the promise of science fiction to the reality of robots today. I've had the opportunity to listen to the first episode, Robot as Servant, and it was very interesting. Here's a clip.
While making this season, we discovered a robot reality that's pretty removed from the robots we imagined. And yet, all those misguided ideas about what a robot should be actually shaped what robots are. And no robot fiction shaped things more than the story we told ourselves about robotic servants.
Yes, and actually, I listened to that, and my favorite robotic servant is Robot and Frank. If you have a chance to see that movie, it's worthwhile. They collaborate in crime. Anyway, that award-winning podcast, by the way, is hosted by Asuran Yabarak, who you just heard, and is produced by Red Hat. Season 8 is out now. Search for Command Line Heroes on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to Command Line Heroes for their support. Okay, so Katherine, I think you have a question about security and privacy, right? Yeah.
So you mentioned something about safety and privacy and such. It occurs to me, so that privacy and security get conflated all the time, right? It's and while they're definitely related, they're not the same thing, right? And I wondered if we could talk about privacy versus security versus safety, because those are all sort of distinct ideas. And while related, I think it's also maybe important to talk about how they are different.
Oh, I love this question so much. It's so timely. I have a strong opinion about this too, and it may not be right.
I was hoping you would.
So here's because I've been thinking about this a lot of late, and I think it's actually quite simple. And it's, first of all, I want to say that like we should never use the word privacy without a qualifier. Of what? Of whom? Same thing with security. Of what? Of, what are we talking about? And so that's the first problem, is that the way we use the language is a little bit careless, I would say. And so privacy, what we mean when we do that sort of sloppy language, when we say privacy, we're thinking about privacy of people. We're not, it's not, the data doesn't care if it's private, right? It's not privacy of the data, it's privacy of people. The object of privacy is the person, right? Like it applies to the person. Security, when we say it colloquially in our industry, we're really talking about security of an IT system. It's technology. We're talking about the security and the integrity of the system, right? Two totally different arenas, right? The privacy of the individual and the integrity of the system, the security of the system. And then safety goes back to the person. It's safety of the person. And so for me, even privacy relates to safety of the person. There's a relationship there, because exposure of information can create harm and risk and, not being safe. So in my sort of simplified understanding of it, that's how I've been viewing this lately. It's very clear. The difference is very clear. We're just not so clear in how we use the terms.
Yeah, that's great to hear you say that, because I noticed the same, and I feel like I'm guilty of it too. I am less careful than I should be with my language. And I think that's something that I'd like to work on. And I suspect some other people listening might have the same feeling.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about, about going to harms again. Every time we see, we're accepting somebody's terms on some website or some service, all these pro formas, it's always protecting the company. It's always covering some corporate ass. It's not covering our own. And we're at square zero on that. I mean, and the weird thing about it too is that the norms here are as old as the industrial age. I mean, industry won the industrial age, the industrial revolution, like 150 years ago, and it's still going on. I mean, companies are busy still setting the terms. But I feel like and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. What we have with TCP/IP, what we have with the fact that we can do FTP, that we're, the internet itself is a peer-to-peer design. Implicit in that is that we will get these things. We will be protected. We will be made safe. We will be able to be secure and private, those separate things, in our own ways eventually. And so I'm wondering if you have some more thoughts about what what we're tackling a few things first, right? Because P7012 is one, the global privacy control is another that came up earlier. But there are going to be others. And I think you're maybe involved with some of those. Have you thought anything to share on that? And what are the beachheads that we're going to attack here?
Yeah, it's interesting because honestly, I think I spend more time, I'm more immersed in really building our standard for what safety means. How do we actually derive objective criteria for measuring safety and respect in technology. These enablers that you're talking about, there's a lot more momentum. We were talking about the rise of privacy tech and that organization and the great work that they're doing, to really foster the making of tools that help us. And that sea change, it's changed radically in 3 years. I remember a few years ago, Omidyar had, what was it, a Race to the Top or something. They were sponsoring some work. There was a lot of, efforts trying to foster the development of tools and technologies that work for people on the side of people, protecting, keeping people safe online and preserving privacy online and that sort of thing. I think that really the landscape is quite radically different today from even just as soon as recently as 3 years ago. A lot more focus on it, and hopefully a lot more money going into developing these tools, and a lot more work happening. We need the standards development, and we need the tools, and it all is happening at the same time. And really, if you think about it, who's defining what safe and private actually means? Because again, if we leave it in the hands of people, or businesses, or industries, we will end up with something that is not reflective of, the diverse views of a broad swath of everyday people, which is who we need to be defining what's safe. Because a lot of this also goes back to diversity issues, right? And these diversity issues exist. They exist in standards development. We're constantly working to have more inclusive, greater representation of more diverse points of view all the time. We so need that, and we're not there. We're not there yet. But that's really a crucial part of it, because otherwise we're guessing, right? In a way, we're kind of speculating on, we're all going to decide what's safe. Each group, each product, each everything. So, and the standards are coming. There's a lot of work going on in the IEEE, the Society for the Social Implications of Technology, and the standards work going on there. We've got, I think, about 10 or 12 standards groups that are covering everything from, our work, P7012, to work on well-being, and technology standards for well-being, technology standards for automatic emotion detection, and there is a lot of work happening right now in parallel with the fostering and fueling of building this technology. So we're building the car, we're changing the tires while the car's running, or whatever that analogy is. And it's going to be messy, and it's we're going to have a lot of things that aren't right. But it's great that it's happening. There's so much happening, and that's exactly what we need.
I think that's the diversity angle is a really, I think, important idea. I've long said women, for example, women have different types of interactions online, and the definition of protecting yourself online, I think, is very different from women than men. Or non-men, frankly. Anybody who is not a male on the internet has a completely different definition of safety and different threats. And I think that's true for everybody, and for any group, we could think of, it probably has a different definition.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's really hugely important. We one of the first things we did is we created this digital harms dictionary, and it's pretty rough and ready. I'm not gonna lie, but it's available on our website. And one of the first bits of feedback we had from a woman of color was that this is not reflective of people of color, and we need to fix that. We have not done that yet, but we aim to. And it's true. It's exactly right. Like, every marginalized voice out there has a slightly different take on what are harms, what they experience as harms online. And we've got to hear those. All of those need to be synthesized into what we consider safe and respectful.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm looking actually at, and I just put it in the back chat, the link to the Digital Harms Dictionary, which of course, for those watching on a normal screen, is unreadably small. All of the typing.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But the XY of it is like there's so many variables in here, and they all matter. Every one of them matters. It's, and again, it's one of those things which, like with privacy got worked out, a couple thousand years ago, and it differs by culture and the rest of that. But on matters of gender, all kinds of identity, all of this stuff is actually, we're just starting on this now in the physical world as well, right? I mean, this is very fraught, and so you're right in the middle of it there, and it's sort of like I love the dictionary, and you're busy evolving that. And I'm sort of wondering where your sort of roster of next things to take on are, or are you so deep in the early stages of this that you just kind of have to get your head down and work on what's in front of you?
No, thank you for setting that up, because actually one of the things we have on the list for next year, and we're seeking some funding to do, is to turn that Digital Harms Dictionary into a wiki, which would make it a much better interactive experience that could actually, we could have crowdsourcing the data in it, which means we can have greater inclusivity with these, desperately needed to be heard voices to contribute into this harms dictionary process. So that is something that is high on our list for next year. Because it is, as you say, it's a bit of an eye chart. You can expand it, but yeah. And we are heads down also on getting our specs out. We did publish our first recommendation, which went through our formal vetting process through the whole community. And that came out of our Respectful Tech Spec Working Group. And I mentioned earlier, we have our first spec, which will likely be approved before the end of the year and then published early next year, it's called the Me2B Safe Website Spec for Respectful Technology. It's kind of a mouthful, but yeah, it'll be the first one. And quickly behind it will be the Me2B Safe mobile app spec for respectful technology. And again, it's sort of table stakes. It's very like minimum criteria for these safe and respectful. And again, I'm going to go back to this idea of these commitments, these kinds of points of deepening or reducing of a relationship of the our Me2B relationship. The tests all focus around those commitments. So we are testing against 10 attributes of safe and respectful commitments, and they are this composition of UX as well as data flow type things.
So I'm curious about your funding model. How do you support the work that you're doing? I notice you have a membership system. Do you also have corporate sponsors or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are a 501c3 in the U.S., and so we have been given grants by Rethinking the Foundation, which is Arlene Harris's family foundation, which I have worked for a number of years. I've worked for her in a different capacity and then started working in the foundation in 2018. And so we've been extremely fortunate to have, enough support from Arlene and the Rethinking the Foundation to really get us off the ground and get us as far as we have. We just recently announced we received a grant from the ISOC Foundation for a benchmark study next year. We're really excited about that and very grateful to them. So we are, kind of grants and philanthropic funds is the core of our funding right now. We do have membership, as you noted, and we have Me's and B's. We have done no real recruitment or anything. We're really going to push for recruitment, especially with Me's next year. We're finally, I tell the team all the time, like, we've been preparing for a dinner party and the house and the dinner is finally ready for the guests. So we're really ready to open the doors and engage with more members. And then the third leg of the revenue model is we do conduct independent audits, product audits. And we have two that we'll run. We'll run like a kind of a data flow audit, which is really just looking at a website or an app or both and letting a vendor know, where's the data going? Do you know where your data is going? This is a little campaign we started recently. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your data is? It's a nod to a PSA that ran in the 60s, 70s, 80s in New York City for a curfew for kids. But we've kind of co-opted that, and we're issuing these notices like it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your data is? And it's not just for me's, it's for B's as well. So with our product testing, we're finding out that businesses really don't have a good grasp on exactly where the data is going due to the complexity of the supply chain. So we run that data flow audit, and we'll run a pre-certification audit too. So those will both be other forms of revenue.
So I would guess, and I might be making assumptions though, but I would guess that the B's that want to participate in membership are typically the more responsible or aware type businesses that want to respect their users more maybe than others. But I wondered with this model how you avoid, undue influence and that sort of thing, given the push-pull of some of your recommendations.
Gosh, Katherine, thank you again for these are such great questions. I love these questions.
Well, I had a little help.
Yeah. No, this is the thing. Doc has really been, Doc was instrumental in kicking off the Me2B Alliance, if I may say so. And actually, thank you publicly and loudly and profusely for all your support in kicking us off. And we had candid discussions, about how do we keep the undue influence out of this? And right now we've been a little bit under the radar screen, so it's not an issue at all. But, businesses only get one vote. So when it comes to approving specs and things, each person gets a vote, each Me member gets a vote, each business gets exactly one vote. So that's kind of a crude tool, but I think, we haven't tested. We haven't had any issues yet. And we don't have a lot of B members. We only have 4 B members. And yes, they are all like the Bs who want to get involved are typically companies that position on privacy and responsible tech and respectful tech. But I've actually appreciated this time when we've been a little bit under the radar to be able to get our baseline spec out because it's completely uninfluenced by industry. And in fact, one of the sort of thorny issues with our spec is that we're not sure anyone will pass. So we're going to be really exploring how to navigate that next year. But I feel really proud that we have not been influenced by. There's no industry influence in what we're doing. There's no there's nothing. It's completely. If anything, we're, like I said, maybe too high a level on respect and safety for people. But we're going to go with this. We're not going to back down off of that. We're going to leave it as it is until proven that it's not effective or it's not helpful for people.
I wonder if it's possible that after you succeed and we succeed, because we're all kind of on the same team here, it will be embarrassing for a company to use the first person pronoun on our behalf, where they say my this and my that. I've never liked that. I've never liked a company saying my, speaking for me and using pronouns for me. And so that's one sort of felicitous thought. But there's another one that a colleague of ours, David Reed, came up with just a couple of weeks ago, just used it offhand. He said, the account, that we have accounts with all these different companies. We can't deal with any company unless we have an account, and is evidence of absent agency on our side. that there's some other a way of dealing that isn't we always have to have accounts with all these different parties, but rather we have an independent way of dealing with them that may involve instruments we don't even have yet, but are, rest on agreements and assumptions and policies and other things that are, again, tacit now, but will be something else later. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts about that an account is that we're stuck with the account for now is evidence of something. Have you any thoughts about that?
It's an interesting word, an interesting idea. I like David's brain. Yeah. What comes up for me when you say account is really, it's the record of everything that either the data controller or the downstream processors or co-controllers, it's really everything that might be tied and correlated to me as a unique individual occupying space in the world. And I'm not sure if that's how is that how he meant it? Account?
Yeah, I think he meant it as well, we have, actually, I think the way he put it, and I was thinking, we actually have to have him here to talk about this, because I may be misrepresenting it, was that it's evidence of absent agency. It's when the entire relationship is contained in the account that is held by only one party.
Yeah.
That is basically bounded. You're in that walled garden. Doesn't matter how nice the walled garden is. You're in Apple's walled garden, you're in Amazon's walled garden, you're in Facebook's or whoever's. But even small companies, you have an account with them. You're in their namespace. It's a different namespace for all of them. That is the root of all of our identity issues, right? That we have we occupy all these namespaces. Those change. We have little global control over any of them, right?
Yeah.
You get married, you change your last name. You have a nickname. You were David, you're now Doc. That's me. And I want to say that with everybody, and you can't. There's no global way to do lots of stuff. But we have the internet now, right? We've had it for 30 years. Maybe we could do something with this.
It's still young. I think that's the thing also, is I try to think about, some perspective on this is it's still relatively young. It's frustrating that we're not further along, but it's still relatively young. And I really like that absent agency thing, because that's exactly right. I mean, the whole, if you think about data brokers and the whole business model of, an existence of data brokers, talk about absence agency, right? And to me, again, you talk about having control over the visible relationships. That's the tip of the iceberg, volume-wise. It's what's massive underneath it is all of these, we call them these hidden B2B affiliate relationships. You don't even know you're having these relationships. And that's the base of the iceberg. And you have no visibility into it. You have no recourse with any of it. You have no awareness it's even happening. And that's the sad truth. People don't know it's happening, the real magnitude of it. Every time I learn a little bit more, I get a little bit more horrified by it. But it's absent agency at a massive scale, at a staggering scale. That's the reality. And that's horrifying. And that's why our spec is focusing on that sort of bottom part of the iceberg right now, to really try to put some things in place to at least expose it, to at least let people know and let businesses know there's this bottom part of an iceberg that is really not okay, and it's extremely harmful and risky, and it's got to stop. We can do better. We can do better than this.
That is great. We are close to the end of our hour, and we generally end with a set of canned questions that are sort of our controls. But the first one isn't. It's just, are there any topics or any questions we haven't asked or haven't touched on that you can address briefly in a minute or two?
I feel like we covered a lot.
We did,
feeling
actually.
pretty satisfied with it.
And I love the emotional high on a depressing low.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Last question no, but it's true. I mean, the deeper you look into this, the more horrifying it gets. You know, a mutual friend of ours, Augustin Fu, who studies ad frauds, has noticed that, you know, the sum of all advertising on the web is going up and up and up and up, and mostly on the back of bots. Bots are doing most of the ads are addressed to bots. Mostly, you know, that it isn't, and it's almost like, are we safe when most of the world to which ads are addressed personally are addressed by and to bots? It's this part of the horror, and then you get all these relationships. So the next is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? That's one of the control questions. I do not. Wow, that is the shortest, perhaps best answer that I've heard so far. Okay, and when two I'm sure you can answer are, somebody says from the chat room, is she's the Me2B knee, the Me2B's knees. There you go. Excellent. That's awesome. There's a great New Yorker cartoon that was out last week, which is a spelling bee. Somebody gets the answer wrong, and the moderator says, "Okay, release the bees," as punishment for not answering it right. Anyway, so what's your favorite text editor in scripting language? I the last two. Do not have one. You don't have I've been a product manager longer than I was a coder. So yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's fine. Well, it has been awesome having you on the show. And the Me2B's knees has to go on your desk plaque. Yeah. Thank you so much. What a delightful conversation, and just what a joy. Thank you so much, both of you. Yeah, and thank you too. I like being outnumbered by women engineers on the show. So thanks for being on. So Katherine, that was good for you too, I'm sure.
That was great. Oh yeah. I really enjoyed this one. Thanks for asking me to do this one today. So right up my alley. Just to wrap it before we go out. What's the biggest thing you learned out of this? I'm curious. Well, I'm trying to think of an upbeat answer. The biggest thing I learned is that there are a lot of really smart people working on these problems. I mean, I wouldn't say I learned that, but I'm reassured by that. And I think that mitigates the horror a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking also that because I mean, this is our time where we do the plugs, and I'm pretty sure you want to plug the show that you and I both do.
Oh yeah, well. We should do that.
And I'd love to have Lisa on that show too.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. That's Reality 2Cast, which, there you go. Thanks y'all for putting that up. Reality2cast.com. And also use Drupal. And if you use Drupal, please upgrade to Drupal 9 pretty quickly. That's my other plug.
Yeah, that's great. Upgrade to Drupal 9. Well, thanks so much, Katherine, and thanks everybody. I want to plug next week when we have Steve Stroh on. Steve is one of the smartest people about wireless everything that I've ever known and talked to, and I've been on so many calls with Steve, but I've never been on a one-on-one with him, I don't think. So it'll be great to have him on. He is a great authority on ham radio also. And I think we have Jonathan coming up as a co-host who is a ham. I have been a ham in a prior life, but I was only a novice. I flunked the code test 3 times in a row. The last 2 times by missing a space. I was 13 years old. But that's when you needed a code test back in the Pleistocene. Anyway, but I learned Ohm's law, and I learned how to draw a circuit, and a bunch of other stuff I could use. Anyway, so we'll see everybody next week on FLOSS Weekly.
No ads, just the content. That's what you get when you join Club TWiT. You even get extras like TWiT Plus, our new bonus feed just for members, and exclusive access to the Club TWiT Discord community. Join now for just $7 a month and support TWiT as we continue to create top-notch podcasts you expect and deserve. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit to learn more and sign up now. Thanks.